We're in Revelation 13, verse 8. And it says, let's get there. My cat's in the way, so let me see if I can get this here. Oh. It says, here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Now, the reality of this is that man's number is 666 because man is made of 6 protons, 6 neutrons, and 6 electrons. That is 666. Man was created on the 6th day. The 6th day was the last day of work by God. So when Adam and Eve began their life in the garden, they began on the 7th day that God rested. And that day was never meant to end. Man fell out of God's rest because the 7th day is the Sabbath. But the Sabbath is, in its true sense and name, is God's rest. It doesn't mean Saturday. It means God's rest, all right? And within that sense, man fell out of God's rest into a work week. And that work week is known because of Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. And that is the 70-week prophecy that Daniel was given while he was speaking to God about the 70 years that Israel was meant to be held captive for all of their misworship, for their fornication against God, to be serving the wrong God, themselves and the god Saturn. But that all beside itself, the week that we are speaking of, the lost week of Daniel 9, is the time that God gave Lucifer to show what would happen if Lucifer was given the ability to rule in heaven over God. If selfish was the law of God's kingdom instead of selfish. So, in order to save the kingdom from having to go through that, the plan of salvation to save not only us, but to save all of God's kingdom and all those beings that never turned away from God. We, as a planet, a universe, and a people, were created that Lucifer and those who followed him would have a place to show what would happen if sin, self-centered worship, selfishness was allowed to reign. Okay? So in that aspect, we were created. That's why it says that man was made for the Sabbath, God's rest, not Sabbath for man, because we were never the focal point of the plan of salvation. We are why Michael stood up to become our salvation, and all of every created being is saved by Michael's selfless gift. So, I don't have anybody's paying attention, no one's listening. I would really enjoy having somebody, anybody, that would want to question or speak about the Bible. But here I am, no one's paying any attention, which is really truly sad because the truth I'm giving is more than what most people would understand. Because if anybody were paying attention, we could speak about how the COVID vaccine of 2020 is all a part of these end times, of how it is part of Lucifer's main plan of deception to make us stuck into this materialistic world, to no longer be pure breath flesh of God, to be like those that were outside the ark, because Noah was found to be the only perfect of his generation. And as it says, just as in the days of Noah, so shall be the days of the coming of the Son of Man. And we're going through that. We have all of physiological changes going on, biometrics being added into man, that we are no longer just pure breath of God. So we need to really understand and begin to step up instead of living so oblivious to the reality that's all around us. We are in the midst of the last few years that man has upon this planet. The sealing of God's people is occurring right now. Many people have bits and most all of the truth that they understand, that the true loss for man will be that they remain materialistic, that they seek their own instead of God's. So the fact that I've been on here for over 5 minutes and not one person has even stepped in, I'm going to allow myself to let go. All right? So remember, you're blessed. Remember, the deceptions are massive, and that we truly need to pay attention as Christians, because, wow, if you don't realize that we are now in the midst of the tribulation, and that the date they keep giving you of 2030 is really quite significant, and you need to understand, correlate that to the reality of being a Christian in the end times. We are of the generation that will see the return of Christ, and it's going to happen within the next 4 years. So be blessed, understand you're well and you're blessed and you're loved, and enjoy your day.